Sissy Spacek is a pure flame and a fierce power of truth, a presence so rare that even Hollywood once recoiled before the untamed light she carried. She didn't just embody Loretta Lynn, she became her with a devotion that stole the breath from anyone watching, and she rose in Carrie with the fragile fury of a soul pushed to its final edge. A quiet storm that redefined the very boundaries of human emotion on screen. For decades, she stood beyond vanity and noise, proving that greatness doesn't clamor for attention. It burns, it endures, and it's forged from a spirit so unbreakable that nothing on earth can erode it. But that brilliance was carved from the deepest darkness, a loss that tore her world clean in half. A pain so violent it rewrote the rhythm of her heart, and wounds that have smoldered for a lifetime without ever tasting a day of peace. And now, at 75, could there be a storm left that strikes harder than this? Before we begin, remember to leave a heart in the comments as a quiet gesture of love for this extraordinary talent. It's heartbreaking how a life can begin in perfect calm, only for shadows to gather long before anyone notices. And for Sissy Spacek, even the earliest whispers of her story carried a trembling that would one day forge a soul unlike any other. She entered the world on December 25, 1949, in the soft glow of Quitman, Texas, a Christmas child born into a family anchored in decency, rhythm, and quiet Southern dignity. Her father, Edwin Arnold Spacek Sr., spent long sun-beaten days helping farmers secure their futures, while her mother, Virginia Francis, kept the courthouse steady with a warmth that hid its own steel. As the youngest of three, Sissy grew up wrapped in a safety that felt almost too gentle, a world stitched together by calm voices, steady routines, and a love so quiet it could easily be mistaken for unbreakable. The Texas of her childhood unfolded like a slow-moving film reel, wide fields shimmering under late afternoon sun, dusty roads humming softly, nights scented with cedar and cut grass. She rode horses with her brothers, Robbie and Edwin Jr., and spent long evenings in the tiny Quitman Theater where the flicker of the projector seemed to awaken something restless inside her. She sang at local talent shows, her voice clear and bright, though she never considered it a gift, just something that seemed to pour out of her naturally. The Spacek household was respected, modest and steady, built on effort rather than excess, on kindness rather than pride. No shouting matches, no fractured marriages, no upheavals, only a peaceful constancy that felt, even then, almost fragile in its perfection. Yet beneath that stillness, something quiet and unspoken shaped her more deeply than she realized. She watched how people in small towns carried their burdens with soft voices and lowered eyes, how heartache lived behind half smiles, how disappointment rarely erupted, but settled like dust on old furniture. She would later recall her mother saying that gentleness was its own kind of strength, and those words burrowed deep, teaching her an empathy far beyond her years. Every detail of daily life became a lesson. The rhythmic tapping of her mother's typewriter, her father's tired hands repairing something yet again. The music Robbie played that seemed to fill spaces no one could name. These impressions carved the emotional vocabulary she would one day bring to screen, long before she ever set foot near Hollywood. But her childhood, as beautiful as it appeared, was never untouched by shadows. She often felt the quiet weight of being the youngest, caught between admiration and expectation, protected yet somehow exposed. There were moments when the silence of Quitman felt too vast, when the stillness carried a tremor she couldn't explain, a reminder that peace is precious precisely because it can be lost. As she entered her teenage years, homecoming queen on the outside, introspective and searching on the inside, she sensed that life beyond her small town would not be as gentle. She didn't yet know why she felt this pull, or why her chest tightened at the thought of staying where she was, but somewhere deep inside, she understood a truth she couldn't yet speak. The world would one day demand a strength far greater than the soft Texas sunlight had prepared her for. It's cruel how one step away from home can feel like falling into a world that doesn't know your name. Leaving Quitman in 1967 felt less like a decision and more like being pulled into a storm she couldn't yet define. When Sissy Spacek stepped onto the streets of New York City, the warm Texas sunlight vanished behind cold towers of steel, and the gentle rhythms of her childhood dissolved into a city that swallowed softness without hesitation. She arrived with a guitar, a few handwritten songs, and a hope far too tender for Manhattan. But almost instantly, New York pressed against every fragile place inside her, testing whether that hope could survive its winter. She had come for music. Under the stage name Rainbow, she released her first single in 1969, "John, You've Gone Too Far." This time, praying it might crack open one of the city's endless doors. Instead, it disappeared into the noise. Producers dismissed her with quick, cutting remarks. Her voice was too soft, too strange, too close to Loretta Lynn to sell. Each judgment slammed shut inside her like an iron gate. With no family nearby, no reputation to cushion failure, and no one to turn to when nights felt too long, she learned that dreams in this city were paid for with loneliness. Some evenings she would sit by her small window, watching neon wash over the rain-soaked street below, wondering if New York even noticed she was here. Survival became her vocabulary. She took catalog modeling jobs for Ford models, not passion but necessity, posing under harsh studio lights for faces that never looked back at her. Her apartment on East 49th Street was narrow and drafty, the kind of place where winter crept in through the window frame and the radiator sputtered like an exhausted old man. Money stretched thin. She often chose between a warm meal and another week of classes at the Lee Strasberg Institute. "I missed Texas in my bones," she later said, "and I missed a kind of warmth you can't buy." On the coldest nights, the loneliness felt sharp enough to bruise. She would wrap herself in a thin blanket, listening to the subway roar beneath the city, feeling as though Manhattan was moving forward without her. Still, she refused to return home. At the Strasberg Institute, the most demanding acting school in America, she tore herself open daily. The training in 1970 and 1971 was merciless. Emotional excavation, psychological exposure, stripping every defense until only truth remained. Acting wasn't pretending, she recalled. It was bleeding honestly. Some nights she walked back to her apartment with trembling hands, unsure if she had given too much of herself or not enough. Auditions came and went. Background roles, one-line tryouts, rooms full of flawless faces that made her feel invisible. Yet it was in that suffocating silence, the kind that squeezes a dream until it either breaks or becomes unbreakable, that something within her began to harden into purpose. The gentle Texas girl was slowly transforming, every rejection sharpening her, every lonely winter night carving depth into her spirit. She couldn't see it then, but the young woman wandering New York with a guitar case and a trembling, stubborn hope was already moving toward a destiny far larger than the city that tried to swallow her. One day, the world would look back. There are rare moments in a life when all the quiet endurance, all the years of being overlooked and underestimated suddenly ignite into something the world can no longer ignore. For Sissy Spacek, that ignition didn't come with bright lights or a triumphant debut. It came softly, almost stealthily, as if greatness had been gathering in the shadows, waiting for its hour. In 1972, after years of drifting through auditions and fading into the background of New York's relentless noise, she found herself on the set of Prime Cut, playing a small, almost invisible role. It wasn't recognition, it wasn't validation, but it was the first glimmer, the first moment Hollywood paused, even briefly, to wonder who this unusually quiet young woman was. And then, in 1973, destiny stopped whispering and began to call her by name. Terrence Malick chose her for Badlands, a film as haunting as a fever dream. As Holly, she didn't perform innocence. She radiated it, laced with a danger and vulnerability critics struggled to describe. Her stillness quivered like a held breath. Her gentleness felt like a secret. Her eyes seemed to carry a sorrow bigger than her years. And somewhere on that set, while she was quietly redefining what authenticity could look like on screen, she met a young art director named Jack Fisk, a collaboration and love story that would anchor her for the next half-century. But if Badlands struck the match, Carrie, 3 years later, was the detonation. In 1976, as Brian De Palma prepared to adapt Stephen King's chilling debut, Sissy Spacek was no one's idea of Hollywood's next leading lady. She didn't fit the polished mold. Her softness, her subtlety, her quiet presence seemed almost at odds with the industry's hunger for spectacle. But she walked into that audition wearing an old childhood dress, hair deliberately limp, face bare, carrying not glamour but truth. And the air in the room shifted. She didn't act Carrie White. She embodied the ache of her, the humiliation of her, the fragile rage trembling beneath her skin. De Palma saw it instantly. And once filming began, she surrendered to the role with a discipline that bordered on brutal. For the infamous prom sequence, she wore the same blood-soaked dress for 3 days straight, letting it stiffen, sour, and cling to her like a second skin. She refused breaks. She refused comfort. She refused distance between herself and the character's agony. And when the final graveyard shot required a hand bursting from the earth, she didn't hesitate. She let Jack Fisk bury her himself, trusting the camera to catch not an act, but a truth. Carrie, made on a shoestring budget of $1.8 million, erupted into nearly $34 million and a cultural phenomenon that still echoes today. Her performance, terrifying, tender, unforgettable, earned her first Academy Award nomination and carved her unmistakably into film history. Yet the summit still waited. In 1980, the nation watched as country music icon Loretta Lynn looked into the camera and declared, without hesitation, "I want Sissy Spacek to play me." It wasn't a request, it was a coronation. And Sissy felt the weight of it instantly. To portray a living legend, one beloved across America, was to risk failure on a monumental scale. But once she stepped into that responsibility, she embraced it with a rigor that stunned even seasoned performers. She trained her voice until she could sing every note herself, raw, unfiltered, entirely her own. She shadowed Loretta on tour, studying the smallest movements, the way she stepped on stage barefoot, the breath she took before a high note, the quiet shift in her eyes when she sang about heartbreak. Sissy inhabited her from age 13 to adulthood without a single prosthetic, relying only on skill, instinct, and a devotion so total it felt spiritual. When Coal Miner's Daughter premiered, critics hailed it as one of the greatest transformations ever captured on film. The movie soared past $67 million, becoming one of the top 10 films of 1980. And when Sissy heard her name called at the Oscars, it was not just triumph, it was vindication. It was every lonely night in New York, every rejection, every whispered doubt finally burning away under the light she had earned one truthful breath at a time. The 1980s crowned her, but they also tested her. Missing 1982 required her to hold grief like a quiet flame, never screaming, never breaking, but smoldering behind her eyes with unbearable truth. It left her awake at night, untethered from the character's sorrow. The River, 1984, pushed her body to its limits. Long days soaked in freezing water, mud clinging to her clothes, her skin bruised by the relentless elements. She didn't have to act exhaustion. The camera simply captured it. And in Crimes of the Heart, 1986, she danced along the knife edge of dark comedy, delivering a performance both dangerous and delicate, proving once again that her range was not wide, it was endless. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, she could have rested on her legacy. She could have coasted on reputation alone. But that wasn't who she was. And in 2001, she delivered one of the most devastating portrayals of her career in the Bedroom. As Ruth Fowler, a mother suspended in the quiet terror of loss, she didn't cry loudly. She collapsed inward, letting the smallest shifts in her face reveal oceans of anguish. Critics called it not acting, remembering, a performance carved from depths most actors never dare touch. It earned her a 6th Academy Award nomination and reaffirmed what Hollywood already knew. Sissy Spacek's power was not in spectacle, but in truth. Through every triumph, every transformation, every role that demanded a piece of her soul, she remained the same rare force. Quiet, steadfast, unwavering. She never chased the spotlight. She simply allowed her work to illuminate the room. And by the time Hollywood understood the magnitude of her gift, she had already reshaped the art form itself. She proved that gentleness can be seismic, that honesty can be revolutionary, and that sometimes the softest voice is the one that echoes longest. Her career is not a collection of films. It is a testament to what the human spirit can endure, transcend, and ultimately turn into light. Fame has a way of blinding even the strongest souls, and at the height of her career, Sissy Spacek was rising so fast that Hollywood could barely keep up. But the higher she climbed, the more terrifying the cost became. Because behind every spotlight, every standing ovation, every stunned review lived a truth she could no longer ignore. Glory can elevate you, but it can also hollow you out. And in the middle of this breathtaking ascent, when the world believed she was untouchable, Sissy faced a choice far more brutal than any she'd ever made on screen. Protect the career she had fought for, or protect the fragile, precious world she and one quiet, steadfast man were trying to build. She had met Jack Fisk years earlier on the set of Badlands in 1973. Nothing about their connection was dramatic. No cinematic thunderclap, no fireworks, just a young art director who saw her without calculation, without envy, without wanting to consume her light. For someone who had spent years in rooms where sincerity was treated like a liability, Jack's honesty felt like oxygen. When they married in 1974 wearing jeans with only their dog as a witness, it wasn't a rebellion. It was a declaration. We build everything together. They didn't yet know how fiercely the world would test that vow. The early years of their marriage were tender, but far from easy. They were young, broke, and chasing careers that devoured time, money, and emotional reserves. Their first apartment rattled in winter winds, and more than once they faced the hollow ache of a near-empty refrigerator. When Jack traveled for work, Sissy stayed behind with pages of scripts spread on the floor, the loneliness pressing into her ribs. When she spent grueling nights on set, Jack worked through the dark crafting props so they could keep the lights on. And like every couple stretched thin by ambition and exhaustion, small fractures began to appear. Quiet resentments, long silences, questions whispered in the dark about whether love could truly survive two dreamers moving at the mercy of an unpredictable industry. What made it harder was Sissy's gift, her ability to dissolve into her characters until she carried their emotions home. After Carrie, she trembled through sleepless nights, her mind still trapped in scenes she had outgrown, but her spirit had not yet shed. After Badlands, she moved through their home with Holly's faraway sadness, Jack watching helplessly as the work he admired drained the woman he loved. They loved each other deeply, but love, real love, was beginning to show its weight. And then came the moment that would define them not as artists, but as partners in the truest, rawest sense of the word. In the late 1970s, during a break between shoots, Jack invited Sissy onto a small aluminum boat while they were working near Utah. A simple ride meant to steal a few quiet minutes away from the noise of film sets and deadlines. The air was cool, the kind that brushed against the skin like a whispered promise. The water lay glass still beneath them, mirroring the canyon walls rising like ancient guardians, etched with centuries of silence. For a few rare minutes, it felt as though the world had paused, just to let them breathe beside each other. But nature rarely gives warnings. A single gust sliced down the river. The stillness snapped. Clouds gathered with unsettling speed, rolling over the canyon like a massive fist preparing to close. And then, without mercy, the storm struck. Not gradually, violently, instantly. A flash flood tore through the canyon with a roar so thunderous it seemed ripped from the earth's core. The sky cracked open. Rain lashed down in sheets. Water poured from every direction at once, turning the quiet river into a raging, rising monster. The boat rocked once, twice, then jerked sideways as if seized by something alive. Jack yelled her name, but the wind devoured his voice. The next moment, the world flipped. Cold water swallowed them whole. The river, now black with silt and fury, spun them through its current. Two small silhouettes tossed like debris in a churning, merciless torrent. The cold hit first, sharp as metal. Then came the chaos, branches scraping, rocks grinding beneath the surface, the current dragging them with a strength that felt almost personal. Jack reached for Sissy's hand. Missed. Reached again through the turbulence, fingers slipping on her soaked sleeve. On the third desperate attempt, his hand caught her wrist just as the current tried to wrench her away. In that split second, nothing existed except that grip, white-knuckled, trembling, refusing to surrender. They were no longer fighting the river. They were fighting the unbearable possibility of losing each other forever. Their lungs burned, their arms shook. But somehow, inch by inch, claw by claw, they forced their way toward the riverbank, the mud sucking at their legs as if trying to pull them back. When they finally collapsed onto solid ground, gasping, drenched, trembling uncontrollably, they didn't speak. They couldn't. The storm raged on around them, pounding the canyon walls like distant war drums, but inside them, a strange stillness settled. A silence that felt both holy and terrifying. In that silence, as their breaths slowly steadied and the world remained blurred with rain, they confronted a truth too clear to ignore. Life can narrow down in one instant to a single choice. Hold on, or let the current take everything. That night, wrapped in blankets inside a tiny rented cabin, listening to floodwater hammer the land outside, they understood something with devastating clarity. They weren't battling Hollywood, or ambition or exhaustion. They had been battling the fragility of life itself, and they had survived because they held on, not out of habit or comfort, but out of a love that refused to let darkness have the final word. After that night, something in them shifted. They held each other with a tenderness sharpened by fear and gratitude, the kind of tenderness that only comes from almost losing what you love most. They argued less, not because life grew easier, but because they finally understood how little time we're ever guaranteed. They forgave faster, recognizing that pride was a luxury two survivors could no longer afford. And they looked at each other differently, not as two ambitious young dreamers chasing separate paths, but as two people who had fought against the same furious river, survived it, and chosen to keep swimming toward the same shore for the rest of their lives. So in 1981, at the height of her fame, Sissy made the decision that would shock Hollywood, but save her soul. She stepped away. She and Jack packed their belongings and moved to a 210-acre horse farm in rural Virginia, a place where mornings smelled of wet earth and distant barns, where fame held no power and life felt mercifully slow. Studios called it reckless, agents called it sabotage, but Sissy called it necessary. "Fame can wait," she said years later. "My daughters can't." Their first child, Skylar, arrived in 1982, turning the farmhouse into a sanctuary of midnight feedings, soft lullabies, and a love deeper than anything fame had offered. Money was tight, sleep was scarce, and exhaustion tested them again and again, especially after Madison was born in 1988. There were arguments. Of course there were. Days when Jack felt overshadowed by her legacy. Nights when Sissy felt torn between motherhood and the creative fire she tried to quiet. But every time a storm rose, internal or external, they chose the harder, braver path. They stayed, they talked, they forgave, and they began again. Today, more than 51 years after they exchanged vows in blue jeans, their marriage stands not because it was perfect, but because they chose each other every single time the world tried to pull them apart. And their story whispers a truth the world often forgets. Love isn't magic. It's effort, sacrifice, and the extraordinary courage to hold on when everything around you says to let go. If her marriage taught her how precious it is to hold on, then her past had already carved the harsher truth into her, that some hands slip away no matter how desperately you cling to them. And the first time life delivered that brutality was in 1967, with a blow so violent it split her world before she even understood what breaking meant. She was still just a quiet Texas girl then, barely stepping into adolescence, trailing behind her big brother Robbie as if he were the sun and she the small orbit caught lovingly in his pull. Robbie wasn't simply her brother. He was her anchor, her compass, the boy who filled their porch with guitar strings and laughter, the presence that made the world feel gentle, predictable, safe. He was 16 when the first faint shadows appeared, 18 when they swallowed him whole, an age when life is supposed to open its doors, not close them. He had dreams, music, a spirit too bright for his small-town walls, a future that felt moments away. And that is why the sickness felt like a betrayal. Leukemia didn't storm in. It seeped, slow and merciless. It began with, "He looks tired." Then, "He's losing weight." Then the quiet shuffling of medical papers, the whispered conversations behind half-closed doors, the sound of a mother trying not to break. Sissy remembered sitting beside his bed, legs dangling from a too-tall chair, watching him fight to pretend he was fine so she wouldn't worry. "Hey, Sissy, you're stuck with me," he would whisper, forcing a grin even as pain tightened his features. Even at 18, an age meant for proms, late-night drives, and wide-open dreams, he was still the protector, still the one shielding her from fear. Then came the morning when the house felt wrong. Too still, too cold, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask permission. It simply takes. Robbie was gone at just 18. Gone before the world could hear the music he carried. Gone before Sissy could say goodbye in a way that felt worthy. Gone before life could give him even the smallest chance to become the man he was already growing into. She remembered her mother gripping the kitchen sink, as if the earth had tilted under her feet. She remembered her father's voice, thin, cracked, unrecognizable. And she remembered the strange sensation that the house itself had lost gravity, that even the walls didn't know how to stand without his laughter holding them up. Yet this wound, unbearable as it was, would become the quiet engine of her art. When critics marveled at her ability to portray grief with shattering truth, they never knew she wasn't performing. She was remembering. Every trembling breath, every long, silent close-up, every flicker of pain across her eyes came from the girl who once stood beside a hospital bed, praying for a miracle that never came. Losing Robbie didn't just break her heart, it reshaped her entire emotional landscape. He became the invisible well she drew from, again and again, the memory that deepened her stillness, sharpened her honesty, and carved into her a wisdom far older than her years. His short life, beautiful, unfinished, unfairly cut short, became the very soul of the woman the world would one day call extraordinary. Time moved on, as it always does. Success found her. Love steadied her. Motherhood was beginning to take root, like a quiet, trembling promise inside her life. But in 1981, just as she was preparing to bring her first child into the world, grief returned, not with the violence of childhood's sudden shattering, but with something far more cruel. A slow unraveling she could feel before she could speak it. Her mother, Virginia, the unshakable pillar of the Spacek home, began to fade the way sunlight slips from a room, minute by minute, until you look up and realize you are sitting in the dark. Here was the woman who typed legal papers with unwavering discipline, whose calm presence felt like shelter, whose lullabies stitched every broken edge of their family after each heartbreak. Watching that light dim felt like watching the foundation of her entire life quietly crack beneath her feet. And the hardest part wasn't the fading. It was knowing it was coming. Knowing there was no stopping it. Knowing that with every passing day, she was losing the one person who had held her through every storm she had ever known. Virginia wasn't simply dying. She was slipping inch by inch from the world, from her daughters, from Sissy's grasp. And Sissy could only stand there, helpless, holding memories that were beginning to ache. Losing her mother was nothing like losing Robbie. Robbie's death tore childhood apart, sudden, brutal, merciless. Losing Virginia was the breaking open of adulthood, a wound that throbbed in slow motion, a grief that arrived with a cruel sense of timing. Because as Sissy stood at the threshold of motherhood, life took from her the only guide she had ever trusted. She longed for that voice, the one that should have whispered, "You're ready. You'll be enough." But the phone would never ring again with her mother's steadiness. She found herself standing alone in her own Virginia kitchen, fingers gripping the counter the way her mother once had, feeling a symmetry so painful it stole her breath. She had become the mother, She had become the strength. She had become the one who must endure without the woman who had taught her how to survive every heartbreak before. And when she held her newborn daughter for the first time, she felt her mother everywhere. In the lullabies she forced past a shaking voice, in the patience she summoned during sleepless nights, in the softness she tried to embody even as grief carved into her ribs. Virginia was gone, but grief, cruel as it was, carried her memory through every room of Sissy's home like a warm hand on her back. It was the second great wound of her life, slow, agonizing, inevitable, and yet it left behind a truth she would cling to for decades. Love doesn't end when life does. It stays. It shapes. It carries you forward, even when your heart feels too broken to move. And for a time, she did. She built a family, a sanctuary, a gentle world rooted in love and morning light. She woke to the soft breathing of her daughters, the steady rhythm of a life she had chosen with intention. But grief is patient. It waits in the quiet. It waits between breaths. It waits even when you believe you have healed. And in 2001, 20 years after losing her mother, grief returned for its third and final blow, a blow that didn't shatter so much as hollow, the kind that pulls the air from a room and leaves only silence behind. This time, it was her father, Edwin Arnold Spacek Sr., the man who had filled her childhood with music drifting through summer air, horses brushing against her shoulder, warm Texas sunsets melting across the sky, and a moral certainty so steady it felt like the ground itself. He was the kind of father who didn't teach with speeches, but with presence, by fixing what was broken, by helping neighbors without being asked, by showing that a good life is measured not in noise, but in kindness. Losing him wasn't an explosion. There was no abruptness, no chaos, no storm. It was a quiet extinguishing, a lantern dimming after a lifetime of burning faithfully. A soft light going out in a familiar room. And the pain was sharp in its subtlety, because she understood, as children rarely do, that losing the last parent is not the loss of a person alone. It is the loss of a witness. The moment you realize there is no one left on earth who remembers the same bedtime stories, the same porch songs, the same muddy boots by the back door, the same childhood storms that felt so enormous then and so distant now. There is a loneliness that only comes once, and she felt it settle into her life like a second shadow. Quiet, unavoidable, and unexpectedly heavy. Robbie, her mother, her father. 3 losses across 3 decades, yet emotionally they hit like 3 waves crashing before she could catch her breath. First, tearing childhood open, then ripping adulthood raw, then closing the door on the home that had made her who she was. They shaped her not because of the pain they left behind, but because of the fierce, extraordinary love that came before it. These 3 were the constellation that guided her, an invisible map etched into her heart. They deepened her art. They sharpened her honesty. They carved into her the emotional truth the world would one day call genius. Every role she touched shimmered with echoes of them, a look, a breath, a silence that belonged not to the character, but to the memory of those she had loved. And in the stillness of her Virginia farm, the horses grazing softly, the morning fog curling over the hills, the air humming with a peace she had spent her life learning to deserve, she often felt them not as ghosts, but as presence, a warmth in her chest, a voice inside her memory, a steadiness in her hands. Love, after all, does not vanish when life ends. It lingers, in the way You speak. In the way you love. In the way you choose gentleness, even when the world has given you every reason to harden. It lingers in the quiet strength of a woman who survived 3 devastating losses and somehow emerged softer, not tougher, brighter, not dimmer. Because grief did not break Sissy Spacek. It forged her into the extraordinary, shimmering soul the world knows today. There are losses that tear childhood apart and losses that hollow adulthood from the inside out. And after losing her father, Sissy Spacek believed grief had finally exhausted its long, merciless reach. She thought the storms had settled. The wounds had closed as tightly as life would allow. She thought she had faced every kind of farewell a heart could survive. But life keeps one final category of loss tucked away. The kind that doesn't steal the people who shaped your beginning, but the one soul who shaped your becoming. The person who walks beside you, who sees you fully, who becomes a kind of chosen kin. And nothing prepares you for the moment when the person who carried your laughter, your fears, your private truths, slips beyond the reach of your hands. Loretta Lynn was that rare, irreplaceable presence. She wasn't Sissy's mother, nor her sister, yet somehow she held the emotional weight of both. Their story began with something that defied logic. Loretta choosing Sissy to play her on screen before ever seeing a single frame of her acting. It wasn't chance. It wasn't guesswork. It was recognition. One woman looked into another and saw truth. The grit, the tenderness, the fire wrapped in quiet humility. From that moment forward, they were no longer 2 artists, but 2 souls knitted together by trust. They became each other's refuge. They shared secrets in backstage hallways, whispered fears in the back seats of long car rides, wiped tears that never made headlines. Loretta taught Sissy not just how to sing like her, but how to stand like her, breathe like her, survive like her. And Sissy, in return, became the witness to Loretta's private self, the woman behind the legend. That is why the years leading to 2022 felt like watching a great lighthouse dim by slow degrees. After her stroke in 2017, Loretta's strength softened. Her voice, once thunder rolling across Nashville, thinned into a gentler melody. The stride that once conquered stages turned delicate. Fans saw age. Sissy saw courage. She visited when she could, holding Loretta's hand as if trying to memorize its warmth before time could take it. She listened to stories told in a softer voice, laughed at jokes whispered through fading breath, and savored every moment when Loretta's spirit pierced through frailty like dawn breaking through storm clouds. The dread grew quietly in Sissy's chest. Not fear of losing a star, but fear of losing the friend who had understood her life from the inside. And then came the morning of October 4th, 2022. The call, the stillness, the words that drop a person to their knees without ever touching their body. Loretta Lynn had passed away in her sleep at her beloved ranch in Hurricane Mills. For the world, it was a national loss. Nashville dimmed its lights, thousands traveled to her ranch. Country legends choked through tributes, and America mourned the voice that had once carried the heartbeat of an entire generation. But for Sissy, it was something deeper, sharper, more intimate. She lost the witness to her life, the one who understood her before fame shaped her, the one who knew the quiet girl she had once been, and the woman she had fought to become. And as the world replayed Coal Miner's Daughter, Sissy replayed something far more sacred. The long drives, the backstage whispers, the laughter thick with love, the moments of honesty shared between 2 women who survived everything except time. Loretta was gone, But the friendship refused to fade. It lived in the songs that now brought tears to Sissy's eyes. It lived in the soft ache in her chest whenever she heard Loretta's voice rise from an old vinyl. It lived in photographs that felt heavier in her hands than they ever had in her memory. It lived in the quiet gratitude that pulsed beneath her grief. Gratitude for a woman who had shaped not just her career, but her soul. And it lived in the truth Sissy now carried like breath. Some people do not disappear when they leave. They become echo, imprint, resonance. They shape the way you speak, the way you forgive, the way you rise after life's hurricanes. Because if grief taught Sissy Spacek anything, it was this: the heart does not break to empty itself. It breaks to expand, to honor, to hold the kind of love that outlives a lifetime. Now, at the age of 75, Sissy Spacek lives a life that feels almost like a quiet benediction. A chapter where peace is not an escape from the past, but a reward earned through decades of courage, loss, resilience, and unwavering truth. Her estimated net worth of $15 million stands not as a symbol of glamour, but as a monument to endurance. The girl who once arrived in New York with a guitar and a half-broken heart now holds a fortune built through artistry rather than spectacle, through integrity rather than marketing. Her 210-acre horse farm in Albemarle County, Virginia, remains her proudest earthly possession. A place carved not from wealth, but from choices, sacrifices, and the decision to build a sanctuary instead of a kingdom. The property unfolds like a poem. Rolling hills softened by morning fog, barns jack designed by hand, a long gravel drive that catches the evening sun just right, and porches wide enough for a lifetime of reflection. Inside the farmhouse, sunlight warms the old oak floors. Books line the walls, family photographs rest on shelves, and the heart of the home, that marble-topped kitchen island, has witnessed the laughter, tears, and quiet miracles of more than 40 years of family life. Even in Texas, she keeps a second home in Quitman, modest yet deeply meaningful, with its refinished hardwood floors, Wolf stove, updated HVAC, and the gentle charm of a place that remembers who she was before the world knew her name. Yet, for all her comfort, Sissy has never been defined by things. She has always been defined by how she uses them, how she creates beauty in simplicity, stability in humility, and gratitude in every corner of her world. Her vehicles are practical, her lifestyle grounded, her home a sanctuary of honesty rather than display. Her wealth whispers, it never shouts. Life today moves slowly, deliberately. A rhythm she chose with the same clarity that once guided her biggest career decisions. She wakes before sunrise, stepping into the cool Virginia air as the horses nuzzle damp grass. She brews her coffee as dawn spills across the hills. She tends her garden, reads on the porch swing, walks her dogs along the fence line, and answers the day with a calm born from decades of surviving storms. Her health remains steady, strengthened by clean eating, daily movement, and a lifetime of physical work on her land. She favors real food, real rest, real silence. And because she has never chased artificial youth, her aging is soft, dignified, luminous. The kind of beauty that grows deeper with time rather than fading. At 75, her eyes still carry the emotional honesty that once stunned Hollywood. They no longer burn with the fire of ambition. Instead, they glow with the warmth of understanding. She has nothing left to prove, only life left to feel. Her daughters, Skylar and Madison, remain the brightest lights in her sky. Skylar, with her warm voice and gentle artistry, moves fluidly between acting and music, often contributing songs to film soundtracks and carrying forward the legacy of emotional truth her mother built. Madison, sensitive and introspective, expresses herself through visual art, her canvases echoing the quiet poetry of life on the farm. To Sissy, their successes are not measured in fame or accolades, but in kindness, depth, and authenticity. They grew up climbing fences, feeding horses, chasing fireflies in tall summer grass. Childhood shaped by freedom rather than cameras, by love rather than pressure. And because Sissy once lost the people who shaped her earliest years, she guarded her daughter's innocence with the same ferocity she once devoted to craft. Her heart for giving is as steady as the land she walks. She supports SPCA shelters with a deep personal tenderness, understanding that humanity is measured not by what we build, but by what we protect. She champions artistic freedom through the Thomas Jefferson Center for the Protection of Free Expression, believing that creativity must be protected if society is to evolve with compassion. She contributes quietly to community programs in both Texas and Virginia. Libraries, schools, cultural spaces, strengthening the local worlds that shaped her own. She does not quantify her giving, she lives it. Her philanthropy is not publicity, it is gratitude expressed in action. And perhaps that is the true essence of her life now: gratitude. Gratitude for the career that gave her voice. Gratitude for the farm that gave her peace. Gratitude for a marriage that survived ambition, scarcity, storms, and decades. Gratitude for daughters who became her life's true masterpiece. Gratitude even for grief, because grief taught her how much love her heart was capable of holding. Sissy Spacek may no longer stand in the glare of Hollywood lights often, but she has never stood brighter. Her legacy lives in every frame she ever touched, every song she ever sang, every life she touched, with a performance so truthful it felt like confession. But her legacy also lives in something far more profound: the way she chose to live after the applause ended. She traded noise for meaning, ambition for family, frenzy for peace. And in doing so, she proved that greatness is not measured by how loudly the world sees you, but by how deeply the people around you feel you. Her life today is not loud, it is luminous, not grand, but rich, not flawless, but full. And perhaps that is the greatest inspiration she offers to all of us, that a life built with integrity will always outshine a life built with spectacle. If Sissy's journey has touched your heart, if her courage, her gentleness, her artistry, or her resilience has ever stayed with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments as a quiet tribute to the truth she has given the world. And from our hearts to yours, Golden American Stars wishes you a life filled with peace, lasting health, profound happiness, and abundant fortune. May your days be gentle, your spirit unshakable, and your path bright with blessings beyond counting.